Happy Sabbath. I am so glad to be here and worship the Lord with you. I'm just sitting here and I'm listening to the veterans presentation. Thank you, sir and ma'am, Carol, for remembering the veterans. I read a book by Tom Brokaw called The Greatest Generation. And in the book, it told many stories of the different soldiers and different ways that they served in the war. Beautiful, amazing, interesting stories. Everyone has a story. Perhaps you remember CBS News between the year 1998 and 2004. Steve Hartman, he had this segment where it was called Everybody Has a Story. Do you remember that? I loved it. He would have a map of the United States, and this poor person he had just interviewed, I say poor because maybe they were uncomfortable being on TV, but they were to take a dart and throw it behind them, and wherever that dart hit on the map, Steve Hartman would go to. He would go to that town, pick up a phone book, randomly choose a person in the phone book and give them a call. What's your story? Now, when he started that, he said it was more of a joke. There's not a lot of interesting people out there, he thought. But as he interviewed people and went and traveled the United States, he saw that the phone book, he said, quoting, is chock full of amazing stories. Everybody has a story. So who am I? Why am I here? Yes, I was invited here. Thank you, Grace. But I have a story too. In fact, I've got a few pictures, and I want to show you my family back home. You can see a picture of my husband, myself, and my son, Ethan. I am a wife. That's part of my story. Been married 25 years this year. Where did the time go? I remember when I thought 5 was a huge number. 25 years. And my son is 15, so I'm a mom. He is 6'3". When I told him the sky's the limit, I didn't mean how tall. I meant what he could do in life. God has a plan for his life, and for us, the sky is the limit. But he thought I meant to grow tall. But my story, well, let me back up. I served the North American Division as the Deaf Ministries Coordinator. And usually on Sabbath to Sabbath, I am back home in my home church, which is in Mountain View, Arkansas. In fact, that picture shows one of our little iconic spots, this beautiful Blanchard Springs that comes out of a cave in Mountain View, Arkansas. And usually in that church, I am not speaking. I'm usually right there. I'm the interpreter. So it feels very strange to have someone interpret for me. So let's move to this next picture, and I'll show you a different family photo. That's me. I'm the one in the middle, the little one. That was so cute. I hated it when people told me that when I was little. But that's my mom and dad. My mom and dad. I had 3 brothers and a sister. And my mom and dad are deaf. They were the best parents. I say were because I've lost my father. He has gone to his rest. but they were the best parents anybody could ever ask for. They were amazing. My mom was an especially amazing mom, and every time I work with my son, talk with my son, teach him things, I hear my mother. And I will stop and say, that's actually your Oma speaking. I will never be my mom. I will never measure up. I keep trying. They gave me the deaf world. I grew up in a home where sign language is what we used. We spoke very little. My mom and dad didn't speak at all. I remember the first time and the only time I ever heard my mother say a word. She said one word to me my whole life. And it was when I don't even remember what I was doing, but I almost did something that was going to hurt me, pick up a hot pan, I don't know. And all of a sudden, I heard this voice, no! That stopped me in my tracks. That was the only time I ever heard my mom say a word. We signed in our house. And my brothers are all older than me. My sister was 9 in the home. And they didn't talk to me. They wanted to sign to me. They heard fine. But they wanted to see me sign because it was so cute to see a little girl use her little hands and sign. Oh, that would irritate my mom. You need to talk with her. She needs to talk. Oh, but Mom, she's so cute. So I ended up in speech therapy. Thanks, brothers. You gotta love them. But I will tell you that English is my second language. I will make mistakes up here. You will hear me stutter because I'm trying to, wait, no, that's not the right word. What's the right word? Oh, I put it in the wrong place. You will hear me stutter. So if I say something incorrectly, if I can't say a word right, just ignore it. But you know what was interesting is I thought I had a plain, boring, normal, average family. I did. So we signed all the time. You also need to understand that my dad comes from a family of 12 kids. 4 of them are deaf. Everybody signed. The 4 that are deaf married deaf people. So now we have 8 in the family that are deaf. And I will tell you, every kid signed very well. So that was normal, right? And then one day, and I remember this as well as it happened yesterday, we went to kindergarten registration at school. I was just 5. And we went into our little school building, the kindergarten building. And I was sitting on my mother's lap. My mother was trying to fill out paperwork, but I was in the way. So she said, would you please get down and go play with the kids? Please. Mom said, please. She's pushing me. I can remember her pushing me. And I said, oh, no, you don't. I was the most stubborn child on the planet. And I was not about to leave that lap. That was safe. It was safe on her lap because I was looking around the room and there is these weird people. All these adults talked. See, when I was that age, I thought children could all hear. I don't know, I was messed up. I was just a kid. I thought children could hear, and when you grow up, you became deaf. And it didn't occur to me that my grandparents could hear. It didn't occur to me that I have friends that were children that were deaf. It was just the way I figured life was. So here I am, I'm sitting on my mother's lap, and I'm looking around the room, and there was a bunch of aliens there. And it was not safe. And my mother, she kept saying, please. And I never told her. I'm sure my mom would have laughed and said, oh, let me tell you about life. But I didn't. I didn't tell her. And she was busy, and we wrestled. I won because I'm stubborn. Then I went to kindergarten, and that's when speech therapy happened. And I was a little bit confused in my little 5, 6, 7-year-old mind. And I had so many people that said my family was different. My family? No. Y'all's family. That's how we talk in Arkansas. We're close enough to Texas. Y'all are wrong. Well, I kept getting questions like, so what's it like at your house? Well, how do you answer a question like that? What's it like at my house? What's it like at your house, I would ask. And they would say, well, how did you learn to talk? I don't know. Words come out of my mouth. And then there was other questions like, how come you can hear? I'm 5. I didn't know I was supposed to hear. I didn't know your parents were supposed to hear. How am I supposed to know these answers? And then they would ask other questions like, oh, can your parents drive? They're not blind. And my favorite, so do your parents argue? What? Yeah, like yell and stuff. Well, they fight like everybody else. I bet it's quiet at your house, huh? Well, we don't talk, but let me tell you what, my mama, she can make her way around the kitchen just fine. She didn't know how loud she was in the kitchen. So, well, is it quiet? And then, I wish my parents were deaf, then I could get away with all kinds of stuff. My mother should have been eagle-eyed. That should have been her name, Eagle Eyes. She knew everything that I did. I could turn my back and she'd be on me in a flash. I could try to say something behind her back. I'd move my little lips and she'd know it. It's called mother's intuition, right? She knew. Yeah, the deaf world is different, though. We have this beautiful group of people over here. These are my friends. This is my world. This is where I belong. And they'll tell you, yeah, we're different. That's okay. There's proper behaviors in the deaf world, behavior that is considered good manners. That's not good manners for everybody else. And that's when I started thinking, okay, there's a big difference between my life and the rest of the world. For example, when I went to school, I got in trouble all the time. All the time. Because I touched other kids. Touching. Keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. I heard it over and over and over and over again. We have to touch. If I'm going to use poor Diane, sorry. If I want to get her attention, I have to touch her. I can't say, if she were deaf, Diane, Diane, Diane. What am I going to do, throw a book at her? I have to touch her, right? Keep your hands to yourself. Oh, that was so confusing. Another rule, it's not polite to point. Oh, boy. Sign language. I can teach you a bunch of signs right now by using this right here. The pointing finger. You, I'm pointing, me, her, him, y'all, God. It's a pronoun. Okay. Another thing, if I want your attention to look somewhere, I have to tell you where to look. If I'm talking about a person, I have to point at them. Not polite to point. I got in trouble. You know, tattletales in school. Miss Roddy, she's pointing again. And here's one that was messy. In the deaf world, when you sit down to eat, you shovel food into your mouth, chew, and then start talking. Because your hands are busy. You can't put it in your mouth if you're signing. You put it in your mouth, you're good to go, go for it. Tell your story. Yeah, well, that didn't go so well in kindergarten. I'm sitting there, I shovel my mouth full of food, and I start talking. Miss Bailey, she's talking with her mouth full. Yeah, that's what I was told to do. So then I'm like, okay, no, I can't do that. No food, talk. Great. Then I go home. I start telling Mom about how school was going and my friends, and Mom's like, okay, stop. Food in your mouth, take a bite. But Mom, take a bite. Okay, now tell me. Breakfast, put it in your mouth, then talk. Lunch, ew. Okay, changed it all around. Supper time, I'm back to putting food in my mouth before I talk. Do you know how hard that was as a kid? Whose rules are these? Who makes these rules up, and why do they change? What are the rules? I didn't realize that there was two worlds even then. I thought people were just messing with me. But then I started thinking, well, maybe there is a difference. Because when I would go visit my cousins, on my mother's side, she's the only one deaf in the family. They don't know about this deaf world too well. I would go visit her house, and we are told to go to the playroom. I go to my friend Gianna's house, and we're told to go to the playroom. You come to my house, you come to my friends that are, deaf family, deaf friends, deaf family, whatever, and their children, when we're told to go play, we're told to bring the toys. And we would have them in the living room. We messed it up. And the deaf people would sit around in their circle and visit, and we're on the floor right at their feet playing. It was the best way to play. You make something, you go tap, 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 there's a touching. Tap, 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 tap on the knee. Yes. Look. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I go back to play. My mother and my father were always present when I was playing with my friends. And we would play. We didn't bother them as long as we didn't stand up. We had to stay on the floor. If we had to go to the bathroom, we had to ask for permission so we could interrupt and go. And I didn't like playing in the playroom. I felt alone. I felt marginalized. I felt kicked out of the house. And that's when I started thinking things are a little different. And I would ask, why do we have to play in here? Oh, because we make too much noise. Noise. Speaking of noise, I figured out I was the only kid in the entire school whose mother said, get in that cabinet, pull out every pot and pan, and here's a bunch of spoons, here's a knife or two, table knife. Have a great time. I'm going to go over here and do dishes or cook or whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's see. We got the big pot. We got the monster stock pot. We got that little pot. We need a lid or two. So I'm like, I had myself a huge drum set, and I would just bang away, and my mom would smile, and she just, dance along with me. I have my own kid, right? So when he's 2 years old, here's you a pot. Here's you another pot. Take a spoon. 2 minutes later, that was nice. Here, let me take that from you. it's different. And that's when I started thinking perspectives. It's perspectives as to what's different. Because I went to Sabbath school. We went to church, a little church with 12 people, and they were all women. My dad was the only male. He was always the deacon. All old ladies, and I was the only one under the age of 60. No, my parents were younger than that. But I had the most wonderful Sabbath school teacher, Miss Lorraine. Sabbath school teachers, thank you. You're shaping your children. Thank you. Miss Lorraine, she sat me down in my class and she said, the lesson today is on the second coming. So she told me about the beautiful, glorious second coming and all the wonderful things that happens when Jesus comes. And there's going to be so many wonderful things. And she said, and guess what? Your mom and dad are going to be able to hear. Yes. And she was so excited. I'm like, oh, well, this must be good. I'm excited too. So I go home and I sit down with my dad and I said, Dad, guess what? Jesus is coming again. He goes, yes, I know that. And I said, he is coming soon. He goes, yes, he is. And I said, and you're going to be able to hear. He goes, so what? The Sabbath school teacher's happy. She said, and I'm trying to like he doesn't get it. So I'm trying to get him excited. And he just nods his head. He says, let me tell you something. I am okay being deaf. I am okay with it. I don't have to hear. In fact, when Jesus comes again, I don't care if I stay deaf for eternity. I just want to be with him. I was still confused. And then my grandmother, my mother's mother, I stayed with her for a few months. And we spent a lot of quality time together. I was about 11, 12 years old, and she said, I want to tell you something about your mother that I never told anybody before. You don't know how much I wish your mom could hear. You don't know how the hours I've spent on my knees praying that God would heal her. I want her to hear. And I sat there going, well, I'm sure glad God didn't answer that prayer. I didn't want God to answer that prayer yet. Because who would my mom be if she wasn't deaf? I mean, just that thought blew me away. It's like, I don't want her to hear. Yeah, when Jesus comes, I've been conditioned. When Jesus comes again, sure. Not now. You couldn't, it wouldn't be mom anymore. Who would this person be if she could hear? And everyone would come up to me and say, I'm so sorry your mom's deaf. Why are you sorry? Like, did you do something to her? And I understand that they were trying to be kind. They were trying to be sweet, and they didn't know what to say. And I understand that. Extend them that grace. But when you say, I'm sorry that your parents are deaf, either means you did something, or it bothers you that they're deaf. Is there something wrong with being deaf? No. There's nothing wrong with being deaf. They just can't hear. They're the same people. When I was going into my teenage years and my young adult years, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and that's coming next. People would tell me, you're going to have to take care of your parents. That's your lot in life. They actually use that term. You have to take care of your parents. My dad was 47 years old when I was born. He is not a spring chicken in this picture. 47 years old when I was born. He raised me pretty well. Always had food, lots of love and nurture, learned all kinds of fun stuff, traveled. I didn't have to take care of them. In fact, whenever I was getting married, people were conditioning my husband, preparing him for a lifelong caretaking. And they said, Chip, my husband's name, real name, Chip, you're going to have quite a mother-in-law. My father was living out of the state, so was the mother. You're going to have to take care of your mother-in-law. So he was preparing himself. And after we got married, he said, you know what? We never see our mom. She doesn't need our help. It's perspectives. It's perspectives. So more about my story, my journey in life, trying to navigate the world, this alien-like world I find myself living in when I'm actually part of this beautiful deaf world. I thought I was deaf. No joke. I'm deaf. Sign's my first language, and I feel more comfortable with deaf people, and we have a great time. And by the way, I love stories, and I will tell you why. Deaf people are the best storytellers of all time, because you don't just hear the words, and it's all up to your imagination to kind of figure out what it looked like or what it sounded like. And no. You don't have to use your imagination. You see it. You know how strong that wind was blowing. You can smell the smoke. You could feel the earth tremble under your feet. That's why I like stories. So, true story. I was working at a deaf youth camp at Camp Mivenden, Idaho. Wonderful week. Wonderful week. We had a little hiccup, and so the camp pastor for the deaf camp, he's deaf, Chuck. This is his name. Chuck, like a beard. So Chuck, I'm helping her out. Chuck comes to me and he says, we need a deaf-only staff meeting. Deaf-only staff meeting. Call it. We're going to meet in this room. Aye, sir. So I went and I collected every deaf staff member. Got a meeting. Then I show up. And I'm sitting there for the deaf, catching it? Deaf-only staff meeting. And I'm sitting there. I was dating a guy. I was never more mad at a person than that moment. He was sitting there, and he looked at me and goes, what are you here for? I'm the one that called the meeting. And I said, deaf-only staff meeting. He goes, so what are you here for? What's wrong with this man? And then he says, you're not deaf. What's wrong with this man? And I said, oh, yes, I am. No, you're not. I am too. What's wrong with this person? That is who I was. My heart was fully deaf. My brain was fully deaf. Deaf church, deaf events, deaf school. Oh my, I won't even start with the schools. deaf competitions and the deaf club meetings and deaf friends and deaf family and deaf. That's who I am. And I looked down and I'm like, I'm more deaf than you are. Because he lost his hearing when he was 12. He lost his hearing when he was 12, learned sign language at 14, and here he is at 25 telling me I'm not deaf. I was born into a deaf, and I told him this, I'm born into a deaf family, but sign language is my first language my whole life. I've been deaf longer than you. And this Chuck was walking along, poor innocent fellow. And he shoves him, and he goes, tell her to get out. And he goes, why? Deaf-only staff meeting. He goes, she's deaf. Told you. And I sat there just as madder than a wet hen. Don't even know what we talked about. I just sat there and, how dare he? And then it dawned on me, I can't hear. So I started feeling a little foolish. So that started me on a different journey. Who am I? Oh man, that was a tough road. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Yeah. Who am I? Who am I? But I can hear. Who am I? And I kept going back and forth. I did not know where to go. Meanwhile, I'm also trying to figure out what I was supposed to do in life. Oh boy. I like all kinds of stuff. I could go to school forever. I wanted to be a school teacher. Kids are not always great. Maybe I would, a nurse. A nurse is wonderful. You know, the things that you can do with a nurse and acts of compassion and mercy. But you have to touch people. I touch people to get their attention, but that's it. And so it was really hard. I was navigating. And I just thought, well, I'll be an interpreter. That's what I'll do. That way I'm still in the deaf world. And I'm working. It's a pretty good thing. And it wasn't right. And I was really struggling. And then I decided, no, I'm going to be a nurse. So I actually went to the school, I applied, and I got it all taken care of. And it was announced at church. And we have a student among us now. She's going into nursing. And I smiled real big, and I thought, that's not my calling. So I never, it ended right there. And then I decided to enroll and declared my major as deaf education. Again, I really love children. I thought this would be my mission. And the whole time that I'm trying to navigate, there is this one gnawing voice in my head. And it said, your mother named you Esther, which, by the way, I hated that name my whole life. Hated that name. I learned to like it. Esther. My mother told me I was named after, yes, the Queen Esther in the Bible. That's a nice story. And she said, it's the most beautiful story, and I want you to be named Esther. She saved that name for 20 years because she never had a girl. Until I came along, and she gave it to me. You know the story about Esther. She had a calling. It was to save her people for such a time as this. Which is interesting because someone was speaking in the back with me and said, Esther, for such a time as this. Was she reading my mind? Because that voice in my head kept saying, Esther, you have a people. Jesus is coming soon for such a time as this. They need you in their world. You need to do deaf ministry. Deaf ministry? I am not a theologian. And I loved God with all my heart growing up. I mean, that's no question there, but there's not even a position to do deaf ministry. So I did volunteer my time, interpreted, presented, taught an evangelistic series, and I tried to find things that I could do on my own. I got married and I left the whole idea of deaf education. And my husband has a company. It's a video production company. It's turned more into IT and more of the equipment sales side of it. But there for a while he was doing video production, and that was used by God to do videos for the deaf. And so we were like constantly thinking, what can we do in deaf ministry for such a time as this? You see, deaf ministry, I have to tell you, there are 2 million deaf people in North America. 2 million. 2 to 4% are Christians. Okay. That means 96, got my numbers backwards, 96 to 98% of deaf North Americans are unchurched. They don't claim God as their Savior. And I don't have time to tell you why. Everybody has a story. There's lots of reasons why. But it wasn't always that way. It's more of a new phenomenon. Very, very secular society. So you have 2 million deaf people. They're all over the United States and Canada. Only 300 some are Adventist. It's really hard to do deaf ministry when you have so few soldiers on the ground. And one pastor. And interpreters, we don't have very many of them. Very thankful for the ones we have today. Very few, thankfully we have more than one, Diane. Thankfully we have more than one. But there's very few. And when we have events that are for deaf people, and we want the interpreter to have the ease of understanding of how to sign things, because it's not English in sign form, it is its own language. And so you have to understand what it's talking about. So if you're talking about Daniel Revelation, you have to understand it too in order to be able to sign it, okay? And so it's hard to find people who can interpret. Or what if they want to get up, a deaf person, to speak? The deaf pastor travels the world to speak, and they're always looking for interpreters to accompany him. The work is huge. It's a deliberate work. You have to be intentional about deaf ministry. You have to seek them out. You have to give up something to walk over and spend time with someone that you may feel very awkward with. So, you can practice today. But rule number 1, deaf people don't bite. Okay. Rule number 2, don't be terrified, because they know about this hearing world you live in. I had a problem with that. I didn't understand that. They know about it, okay? They know how to survive in your world. You don't know what to do? Let them know, hey, I want to talk with you, and they'll whip out a pen, whip out a pad of paper, see if you can finger spell. They might say, hey, we've got these great things called handheld devices. You talk into it, I read what you have to say. There's all kinds of things that we have now, and they know that. They will be happy to help you communicate with them. When I got into deaf ministry, I started seeing At first, by the way, I was very selfish because it's my world. That's all there is, remember? And so I had a hard time realizing that, no, there's other worlds, there's other people. And I started looking and seeing there's all these other people that have unique experiences in life, things that make their life a little different than everybody else's, different than mine. And I saw that some of the heartache that my parents and my friends have about interacting with deaf, hearing people, maybe deaf people are the most underemployed people in North America, in the United States. They have so many talents, so many skills. They can do anything but hear, and yet they're underemployed because people think they can't. Okay, so I see the struggle. I see some people living in poverty because no one would give them a chance to work at a fast food restaurant. They'll give it to a 16-year-old who has no idea how to cook, but they won't hire a deaf person who's cooked his whole life. Does that make sense? Okay, that's what I'm talking about. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of hurt in the family when families tell like my own mother was expected to be at every family reunion, every Christmas dinner, every Thanksgiving, 4th of July, Mother's Day, Father's Day. They wanted her there in that chair. They never talked to her. But she better be there because they wanted to see her. They would always say, oh, I wanted to see your mom. Where was your mom? How about getting to know my mom? They wanted her there, but they didn't talk to her. Ugh, who wants to be a wallflower? So there's a lot of feelings. I'm not going to go into all of that. Then you have people that can hear who have no idea and are scared to ask, right? And so I find myself becoming a bridge between the two worlds. In fact, some of my deaf friends dubbed me the bridge builder. That was okay. Bridge builder between the two. But I began to see, yes, we can build those bridges. Things can be better. I will tell you that in my church we have a deaf member. I use her as my poster child. Kathy. Everybody loves Kathy. If it wasn't for Kathy, our church will have burned down already. She is fantastic. She's our head deaconess. And everything is in perfect order, very organized, and we all communicate. She's making sure, okay, hey, I did not hear from you. Did you not get my email? Oh, I got your email. I need an answer. She really was, on top of it. Always has been on top of it. And when she was just so tired of the frustration of not being able to communicate, and she resigned, the head elder, and I'm not kidding, he was on his knees begging. And I'm not making this up. He was on his knees saying, please be our head deaconess. She didn't know what to do with that, so she said, okay. And you can't tell a poor crying man on his knees, no. So, and I see what can be done. Our church could not live without this one deaf member. So yes, we're building bridges. But I began to see other people in our own church. And as I travel and I talk with people, I'm seeing, a lot of people don't know they have possibility. Grace mentioned Adventist Possibilities Ministries. That is something that covers a huge area that I am not even able to touch on. Huge area. Blindness, deafness, those with physical challenges, whatever they may be. Those with mental struggles, whatever they may be. Those that are orphaned. And those that are bereaved, they lost a spouse, and caretakers. They all have unique needs and yet unique gifts that they can give to us. And as I started working with Adventist Possibilities Ministries as a source of information, a source of resources, I began to learn about these other areas. Oh my. And it was a reminder that we live on this sinful world. This is not the way God made this world. Genesis 1:31 tells us, and God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. In the evening and the morning, or the sixth day. It was very good. It was perfect. Band-Aids hadn't been invented, okay? Bruises were an unknown. Nobody coughed. And now those are so normal, we don't give it a thought. Wonder where I got that bruise. Glasses, yeah, they're annoying. But do you know that just wearing glasses means that you're not perfect? We're living in a world of sin. And when we think of that, we often think of badness, the evil, the way people behave or the way they think, the way they speak. But it's more than that. It's how we live. We live with flowers that wilt, so we have flowers that aren't real, so they'll last, okay? We have deafness, we have blindness, we have all this stuff, not because any one person did anything wrong, but rather because of the world that we live in. We're all broken. I'm very impressed with this church. I was looking at the bulletin, listening to the Sabbath school remarks, and listening to the announcements, and this is a busy church. Praise the Lord. Keep it up. Keep it up. And I believe that you have taken this text to heart. Colossians 3:12. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. When you work with people that are different than yourself, it could be simply a language barrier, that's all. It could be somebody that's younger. It could be somebody that's older. It could be any of those things. You learn that it takes a little more patience. Is that a bad thing? It's good for you. It's good for you. But this text tells us that we need to be clothed in compassion. And when we think of the word compassion, we often think of the word pity. And that makes me think of when people said, I'm sorry that your parents are deaf. That's not what compassion means. If you look it up, it actually comes from the Latin word compati, which means to suffer with. Other words for compassion include empathy, fellow feeling, care, concern, warmth, love, tenderness, mercy, and kindness. Oh, those are beautiful. That sounds like God. And the opposite meaning means indifference or cruelty. I'm going to touch on two more stories, and then I'll close. Remember the song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man? Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. Yeah, you guys are singing, I hear. Perfect. You're awake. So Luke, we can turn to that. Luke chapter 19. The story of Zacchaeus. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 6. And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was of little stature. He was little, he was short. And when he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. So I want to look at verse 3. Now, why is it Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus? I had a lot of fun with this. I've been asking people that question lately. Why couldn't Zacchaeus see Jesus? And the answer always came back, because he was short. Huh. Interesting. Is that what the Bible says? No. Verse 3 says he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press. In other words, he couldn't see because of the crowd. It had nothing to do with how tall he was. Sure, if he was a 6'3" giant like my son, he wouldn't have any trouble seeing. Yeah, but it wasn't. Your height doesn't affect your vision. It didn't matter how little or how tall any one person is, they can still see Jesus. He couldn't see because the people were in the way. So the question is, are we in the way? They could have said, oh yeah, remember Zacchaeus? He's kind of a wee little man. Come on. They could have thought of him. They didn't. They ignored him. So Zacchaeus could not see Jesus for the crowd, not his height. He had to be resourceful. He found a loop, like a way to get around it, so he climbed up the tree. He's a resourceful man, and we celebrate that. But the crowd, let us not be the crowd that keeps people from seeing Jesus. Let us be the crowd that points to Jesus and says, hey, come here. Jesus is coming. And we have that same message. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. Now, I'm going to show, let me ask you this question first. Have you ever run in a 5K? A few. Good. That's hard work. I have an app on my phone, from couch to 5K. I'm actually training right now because my son decided to do a 5K. We homeschool, and homeschool families do everything together. So we start the 5 minutes warm up, and then it says, start running. Goes, bye, Mom. And he takes off. Yes, I'm in the back. But we're practicing, we're training. Well, I'm going to tell you about this team. And I'd like for them to show this picture. Have a series of pictures about this team. You might have heard of them. Team Hoyt. Team Hoyt. Okay, so this young man that you see in the chair, he was born in 1962. His name is Rick. When he was being born, the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck and caused complications. He was born with cerebral palsy at that point. The doctors saw this case as severe and said, sir, ma'am, this baby's not going to amount to anything. He's just going to be a vegetable. You need to just put him in an institution, forget about him. They couldn't do that. That was their baby. So they found other doctors. And one doctor said, you treat that little baby like he was anybody else. And they did. They did. They could see that he was intelligent. He couldn't talk. But they could see he was tracking. He was paying attention. He'd smile when he was supposed to smile, those kind of things. And so when he was 11, they got him a computer where he could touch with his face every time the cursor went over a letter. He would touch the side of this device, and it would click on that letter so he could start typing. That was amazing. They could see in his head what he wanted to say. We could finally communicate. And when he was in high school, after this, he was able to go to school. And when he was in high school, one of the lacrosse players had an accident and was paralyzed. He could not run, could not walk. And so they were doing this special run, saying, run for him. be his legs. And they were doing this fundraiser, and Rick told his father, I want to run. He can't really move. And Dad said, what? Dad, you and I, we can be a team. Let's run. And the dad said, are you crazy? He's like the rest of you guys. I don't run. Ever. But he didn't want to say no to him. So he said, okay. Put them in the wheelchair that they could barely push, and they ran the 5 miles, which is much longer than a 5K. 5 miles they ran. They came second from last. But the picture of him, Rick, at that finish line, he was smiling, the biggest smile ever. And when they got home, he tapped, and he said, when I was running, I didn't feel handicapped. Well, what's a dad to do with that? The dad said, well, I guess we're going to do that again, aren't we? So he went to school that week, and Dad says, well, let's see. I got a wheelbarrow. And he practiced running with the field wheelbarrow when his son was in school. And he practiced, and he practiced, and he practiced. And they became Team Hoyt. Go ahead and change the pictures. There's 2 or 3 different ones. You can see that this is from the Boston Marathon. It's not a 5K. Let me go to the next one. And then the last one. Besides running a 5K, they decided to compete in triathlons. The father hadn't been on a bike since he thinks he was 7. And now he's going to compete on a bike. Second of all, he didn't know how to swim. I can swim. I am not doing that. But he did it for his son. And so I want you to get this. He rode the bike, put his son in the front. He swam in the water, and his son was in a raft tethered to his back, and he swam. So he is swimming and pulling at the same time, okay? From 1977 to 2016, 39 years Team Hoyt has been doing this. They competed in 1,130 competitions. 1,130 competitions. And only 176 of them were 5Ks. Those were the little races. They did 97 half marathons. They did 72 marathons. They did 22 duathlons, 244 triathlons, and 6 Ironman competitions. They biked across the United States, biked and ran both. 3,735 miles in 45 days. Takes my breath away thinking about that. Their personal best 5K was done in 17 minutes, and those of you that have done a 5K, that's pretty good. 17, that's 3.1 miles in 17 minutes. And their best marathon was 2 hours and 40 minutes. 40 minutes behind the current world record. They were a real team. I would encourage you to go to YouTube and pull up at least one little video about Team Hoyt, H-O-Y-T, Team Hoyt. The story is just so amazing. They were a real team. He said, the father, I am just his legs. That's all I am. He is the one with the will. He is the one with the drive. He's the one that compels me to run. If it wasn't for him, I definitely would not be running. Remember. Okay. He said, but I'm doing this because he wants it so bad. It's his passion. He's the athlete. I'm just the legs. I can learn two things from that. Two things. What can we do together? If Team Hoyt can be out there competing, pushing and pulling and all this stuff with the best of them, what can we do together? God has called us to be a body of believers. And I wanted to, but I could not get to it. Read Romans. Read 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In fact, that's my challenge for you this Sabbath afternoon. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Read it. And read it in a different way. Read it from a perspective of, are there people that we don't include or empower to do their ministry, to use their gifts? Or maybe I don't feel like I can contribute because I am not gifted. Read that this afternoon. I'm going to challenge you. But what can we do together? Glaciers started with snowflakes. I know that's not a big thing in Arizona. Snowflakes are so fragile that they just disintegrate. But they can become a glacier and move mountains. What can we do together for God? And then I see a different picture. You see, Team Hoyt, that's their story, but I'm looking at it from a spiritual viewpoint. And I think about how Paul mentions that we are running a race. You know, when we talk about running the race, we think of it as running alone. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 4. Second Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, he said, before he was to lose his life, he said, I have fought a good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. And that we have talked about many times before. That's a beautiful way to end your life, if you will. But the New King James Version, it says, I have finished the race. When we think of racing, we think about, I'm doing it by myself. Have you ever tried to do it by yourself? You know what I'm talking about. It's a tough race. There's nothing easy about it. We struggle. We plod. Sometimes we crawl and we pull by our fingertips. But the truth is, we're not the runners. Okay? I picture myself in the chair. I'm the one that's like, let's go. It's my race. But my Father, my Heavenly Father, is the one he's my legs. He's the one that powers me to run the race. And that's what I see. You know, on my own, that's all I can do is to crawl, digging with my fingertips. But even then, that's with it's not even my own strength. But I'm in that wheelchair, like Rick. I'm in that raft, tied up to my Heavenly Father, skimming across the water. He is powering me through this race. And with a teammate like that, a dad like that, we're not only going to finish the race, but we're going to finish it well. And you know what? You have the same father. You have the same dad who is your strength. All things are possible through him, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It is him that gives us the power. And so whenever you face a challenge, whatever that challenge may be, it may be to get out of bed. It may be to hold your tongue. It may be to step out and do something uncomfortable. It may be simply staying true to him and praying. But whatever it is, with a team like that, you're not only going to finish, but you're going to finish well. So that's my story, part of it. I'll spare you all the other details. Out in the foyer, I know there's some little gift bags. Inside the gift bag is a little booklet that I wrote. It's a little booklet. It was supposed to be a brochure. It was supposed to be about deaf people, the deaf world and deaf ministry, and I couldn't put it all in one little brochure. So it's a little booklet. Pick one up. Pick one up. It tells you how to open your life up to a deaf person and be a friend, and how to receive that friendship in return. The closing song that we have for today is Blessed Assurance. Do you know who wrote that song? Fanny Crosby, a blind woman. Blindness did not define her. Christ defined her. And she was not shaped. She did not shape her life around blindness. She shaped her life around God. And she said, I am a missionary. And she worked as a missionary in the urban situation. And she wrote some of the most uplifting, the most powerful music ever. Fanny Crosby, Blessed Assurance. This Bible is full of stories about people. And you're part of that story. So what's your story? You have one. God is not done with it. He's still writing it. So what is your story and what is your song? Let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity to share. And Father, I first want to say I'm so sorry that I just jumped right into it and didn't even think to pause to say help. I know you did, and I thank you for that. But I ask that you help us to be full of compassion to one another, to have empathy, to suffer with, and not be cruel or indifferent. Help us to see one another as part of the body. Without one, we're not complete, we're not whole. Help us to equip and empower each other to do whatever it is you've called each one of us to do, and help us to stay on that path with you. Help us to stay in that wheelbarrow or that chair or in that raft, whatever it may be, so you can finish that race with us. And in Jesus' name, amen.